Hello, my good friends. How are you today? May God bless you all. Why does a poor woman return all the money she can keep? What secrets bring two broken families together? And what will the villain in the expensive suit do when everything else turns against him? This isn't just a story about money. It's about kindness, sacrifice, and what's left when everything else falls apart. Watch this video full of drama, tears, and twists you never expected. Subscribe and comment where you're watching now and join us in discovering, can a penny change a life? The answer starts here. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead in the cramped hospital room, casting a sickly green glow over everything. The chipped beige walls, the tangle of tubes snaking from the bed, the faded linoleum floor that smelled like bleach and despair. Ellie Harper sat hunched in a hard plastic chair, her cracked leather jacket pulled tight around her shoulders like it could shield her from the cold seeping up through her boots. Her hands, rough from years of scrubbing counters at Harper's joint, gripped her mom's frail fingers. Ruth's breathing was shallow now, a faint rasp that barely moved the thin blanket draped over her chest. The heart monitor beeped slow and steady, a cruel countdown Ellie couldn't stop. Outside the room, down the hall of Mercy General in Detroit, the night pressed against the windows, black and heavy, the kind of Michigan winter dark that swallowed streetlights whole. Ellie's dark hair hung loose, greasy from days without a shower, and her brown eyes, usually sharp with grit, were red-rimmed and blurry. She'd been here since yesterday, when the nurses called to say Ruth had taken a turn, her Alzheimer's finally winning the war it had been waging for years. At 38, Ellie felt older than the rusted-out Pontiacs littering the lots back on Grand River. She'd fought to keep her mom home, but the falls, the wandering, the moments Ruth didn't even know her own daughter's name, it had all piled up till this. "Ma," Ellie whispered, her voice cracking like ice under boots. "You still with me?" Ruth's eyelids fluttered, slow, like she was waking from a dream she didn't want to leave. Her hand twitched in Ellie's, bony and cold, the skin paper-thin. "Ellie," she mumbled, her voice a ghost of the woman who used to belt Motown tunes over the diner counter. "My Ellie. Don't let me go alone, huh?" Ellie swallowed hard, her throat tight as a fist. "Not a chance, Ma. I'm right here. Always." She brushed a strand of gray hair off Ruth's forehead, the gesture soft but shaky. The room smelled sharp, antiseptic mixed with the faint whiff of flowers someone had left wilting in a plastic vase by the bed. She hated it here, hated the sterile quiet, the way it made every second feel like it was slipping through her fingers. Down the hall, footsteps echoed, heavy, deliberate, not the soft shuffle of a nurse. Ellie glanced up as Ethan Caldwell stepped into the doorway, his broad frame filling it like he didn't quite belong. His Carhartt jacket was dusted with snow, and his graying stubble caught the light, making him look older than 50, like the weight of the world had carved extra lines into his face. Behind him, Sophie clung to his hand, her little knit cap pulled low over her curls, her 6-year-old eyes wide and unsure. She clutched a stuffed bunny, its ears flopping over her mittens. "Ellie," Ethan said, his voice low, rough like gravel under tires. He didn't move closer, just stood there, letting the moment hang. "We heard, came as soon as we could." Ellie nodded, too tired to muster much else. "Yeah, thanks." She looked back at Ruth, whose chest rose and fell in tiny, fragile hitches. Sophie peeked around her dad's leg, her bunny dangling, and Ellie forced a small smile. "Hey, kiddo. You okay out there?" Sophie nodded, shy, then whispered, "Is she gonna be okay?" Ellie's breath caught, and she couldn't answer, not with words anyway. She just squeezed Ruth's hand tighter, like it'd keep her anchored. Before she could figure out what to say, another figure shuffled in behind Ethan, taller, leaner, with a grease-stained hoodie and boots that had seen too many miles. Ryan. His jaw was set hard, his hazel eyes bloodshot, like he'd been up all night wrestling something he couldn't shake. He didn't look at Ethan, just stared straight at the bed, hands shoved deep in his pockets. "Jesus," Ryan muttered, barely audible, his voice thick with something Ellie couldn't place, anger maybe, or regret. "Didn't think it'd end like this." Ellie frowned, her head snapping up. "What are you doing here, Ryan? Thought you didn't want to see us." He flinched, like she'd hit him, but didn't answer right away. Ethan stepped forward, his boots scuffing the floor, and put a hand on Sophie's shoulder. "He's here 'cause of you, Ellie. 'Cause of what you did, what Ruth did." "What the hell's that supposed to mean?" Ellie's voice rose, sharp and raw, cutting through the hum of the machines. She didn't have the energy for riddles, not now, not when her mom was slipping away. Ethan reached into his jacket, pulling out a folded piece of paper, yellowed, creased, the edges soft from years of being handled. He held it out, his hand steady, but his eyes wet. "Found this in Ruth's stuff when we moved her last week. Nurse said it fell out of her Bible. It's about Grace." Ellie's stomach dropped. Grace, Ethan's wife, Sophie's mom, dead 5 years now from cancer. She'd heard the name plenty since that damn suitcase showed up. But this? She took the paper, her fingers trembling as she unfolded it. The handwriting was Ruth's, shaky but hers, from before the disease stole her steady grip. "Ellie, baby, if you're reading this, I'm gone or close to it. I never told you about that night on 8 Mile about Grace Caldwell. She was drunk, crashed her car into a pole, damn near killed herself and her kid brother Ryan. I was driving home from the diner, saw it happen. Pulled him out, got him to a doc friend of mine, no cops, no questions. She begged me to keep quiet, said her husband couldn't know, said Ryan was too young to take the fall. I did it 'cause it was right. Never told a soul, not even you. Be good, my girl. I'm proud of you. Always." The words blurred as tears stung Ellie's eyes, hot and fast. She pressed a hand to her mouth, the paper crinkling against her lips. "Ma, you did that?" She choked out, looking at Ruth, who didn't stir, just breathed, slow and fading. Ethan's voice broke the silence, rough but soft. "Grace never told me either, not till those letters in the suitcase, ones she wrote before she died. She said Ruth saved her life, gave her years she wouldn't have had, gave me Sophie, and Ryan." He glanced at the younger man, who still wouldn't meet his eyes. "She kept you out of jail, man." Ryan's shoulders hunched, his hands balling into fists in his pockets. "I didn't know," he said, voice cracking like dry wood. I thought Grace just left me behind. Thought you—" He cut off, glaring at Ethan, then dropped his head. "I was a dumbass kid, drunk off my ass that night. Should have been me in that wreck." Ellie stared at him, then back at the letter, her chest tight as a drum. All those years Ruth carried that secret, through the diner closing, through Ellie's deadbeat ex walking out, through the fog of Alzheimer's eating her mind. And now, here they were, Ethan, Sophie, Ryan, all tied together by a dime's worth of kindness Ruth tossed into the world 2 decades ago. Ruth's hand twitched again, and her eyes opened, just a slit, cloudy but searching. "Ellie," she rasped, weaker now, like the word took everything she had left. "Yeah, Ma, I'm here," Ellie said, leaning close, her tears dripping onto the blanket. You did good, huh? Real good." A faint smile ghosted over Ruth's lips, and she squeezed Ellie's hand, barely a flutter, but enough. "Proud of you," she breathed, and then her chest stilled, the monitor flatlining with a long, piercing beep that cut through the room like a knife. Ellie choked on a sob, pressing her forehead to Ruth's hand as the nurses slipped in, quiet and quick, shutting off the machine. Ethan stepped closer, his hand hovering over her shoulder before settling there, heavy and warm. Sophie sniffled, burying her face in her bunny, and Ryan just stood there, tears streaking down his face, silent but broken. "She's why we're here," Ethan said, voice thick. "All of us. You, me, Sophie, Ryan. That suitcase you brought back. It wasn't just money, Ellie. It was this." Ellie couldn't speak, couldn't breathe past the ache ripping through her. She clutched the letter, the last piece of her mom she'd ever hold, and looked up at them. Ethan's steady eyes, Sophie's small, trembling frame, Ryan's bowed head. Two families, cracked and bruised, stitched together by a woman who'd given everything and asked for nothing. The hospital room went quiet, save for the soft rustle of snow against the window. And in that silence, Ellie felt it, a thread, thin but tough as steel, tying them all to a past none of them saw coming. The wind howled down Grand River Avenue, cutting through Ellie Harper's thrift store coat like a blade as she stood on the deserted platform of the old Detroit People Mover station. It was past midnight, the kind of late where the city felt more like a ghost town than a living thing. Just flickering streetlights and the occasional rumble of a semi hauling freight down I-94. Her boots crunched on grit and broken glass, and her breath puffed out in white clouds, curling up toward the rusted steel beams overhead. In one hand, she clutched a crumpled stack of bills, $800 for rent on Harper's joint, $60 for Ruth's meds, all overdue, all screaming at her from the ink-stained paper. In the other, her keys jangled, cold metal biting into her palm. She'd just locked up the diner after a slow night. $10 in tips, a couple of drunk regulars arguing over the Lions' last game, and a sink that wouldn't stop dripping no matter how hard she'd yanked the wrench. Her head throbbed, a dull ache from too much coffee and not enough sleep, and all she wanted was to crash on the lumpy couch back at the apartment she shared with Ruth. The train was late. Always was this time of night, and she paced the platform, boots scuffing the cracked concrete, trying to figure out how she'd stretch her last $20 till Friday. That's when she saw it, a black nylon suitcase tucked behind a metal bench, half hidden in the shadows like it had been forgotten in a hurry. It wasn't fancy, just scuffed up and plain, the kind you'd see at a pawn shop for $10. Ellie stopped, her gut twisting with that prickly feeling you get when something's off. In Detroit, an abandoned bag could mean anything. Lost luggage, a junkie's stash, or worse. She glanced around, the platform empty except for the hum of a dying fluorescent bulb and the distant wail of a siren. No one. Just her and this damn thing. "Leave it," she muttered to herself, kicking a pebble that skittered across the platform. "Ain't your problem." But her feet didn't listen. She edged closer, heart thumping louder than the wind, and crouched down, her knees popping from too many years on her feet. The zipper was stuck half open, snagged on something inside, and she could see a glimpse of green. Cash, maybe, or just some punk's laundry. "Jesus, Ellie, what are you doing?" she hissed, but her hands moved anyway, tugging the zipper with a quick, sharp yank. It gave, and the flap fell open, spilling a stack of bills. Hundreds, crisp and banded with rubber, tumbling onto the cold concrete like they were mocking her. Her breath caught, sharp and fast, and she rocked back on her heels, staring at the money like it might bite. Holy shit! She reached out, hesitant, her fingers brushing the top bundle. Real, solid, not some fake Monopoly crap. Her mind raced, doing the math without even trying. 10 grand, 20, maybe more. 100,000 if she was lucky. Enough to pay the rent, fix the sink, get Ruth's meds for months. Enough to breathe for once, instead of drowning. Her hands shook as she shoved the stack back in, the weight of it sinking into her chest like a brick. But then she saw the rest. Envelopes, tucked in a side pocket, tied with a faded red string. old, worn, like they'd been carried around forever. She pulled one out, the paper soft under her calloused fingers, and squinted at the handwriting under the dim light. To Sophie and Ryan. Elegant loops, faded ink. Someone's heart poured onto the page. Her stomach flipped. This wasn't just cash. This was somebody's life. The train's rumble jolted her, headlights cutting through the dark as it screeched into the station. Ellie scrambled to zip the suitcase shut, her pulse hammering in her ears, and hauled it up by the handle. It was heavier than it looked, dragging at her arm as she stood there, caught between the doors sliding open and the platform stretching empty behind her. She could leave it, walk away, pretend she never saw it. Or she could take it, figure it out later, maybe save herself from the hole she'd been sinking in since her ex split 3 years ago. Get on the damn train, she told herself, but her boots stayed planted. The doors hissed shut, and the train rolled off, leaving her alone again with the wind and the suitcase. She flipped the luggage tag, squinting at the smudged print. Ethan Caldwell, Caldwell Industries, 500 Griswold St., Detroit. A name, an address. Some rich guy downtown probably wouldn't even miss it. But Ruth's voice echoed in her head, sharp as ever from the days before the fog took her. You don't take what ain't yours, Ellie. That's how you sleep at night. She cursed under her breath, kicking the bench hard enough to make it rattle. Sleep? She hadn't slept right in months. Worrying about the diner, Ruth's pills, the way her mom's eyes went blank more often now. This money could fix it all, couldn't it? The wind bit harder, stinging her cheeks, and she hugged the suitcase to her chest, its edges digging into her ribs. Fine, Ma, she muttered, teeth gritted. But if this screws me, I'm blaming you. She turned toward the stairs, the weight of her choice settling cold and heavy in her gut. Whatever this was, cash, letters, some stranger's mess. She was in it now. Back at the apartment, a squat brick building off Cass Avenue, she fumbled with the keys, the suitcase banging against her leg as she climbed the creaky stairs. The hall smelled like stale cigarettes and burnt toast, and the light above 3B flickered like it was on its last legs. Inside, Ruth was asleep on the couch, her thin frame curled under a quilt Ellie'd patched together from old diner aprons. The TV droned low, some late-night infomercial hawking knives, casting blue flickers across her mom's face. Lines deeper now, carved by time, and a disease that didn't quit. Ellie set the suitcase by the door, quiet as she could, and sank into the armchair, the springs groaning under her. She stared at it, the black nylon lump sitting there like a bomb waiting to go off. Her hands itched to open it again, count the cash, read those letters. But something stopped her, a knot in her chest, tight and stubborn, telling her this wasn't hers to mess with. The clock ticked past 1 a.m., the city outside humming its restless tune, car horns, a distant train whistle, the thud of snow against the window. Ellie rubbed her face, exhaustion pulling at her bones, and muttered, "What the hell'd I just step into?" She didn't know yet. Not the man who'd lost it, not the kid and brother those letters were for, not the shitstorm it'd drag her through. But as she kicked off her boots and slumped back, one thing stuck. This wasn't just about money. It was bigger, messier, and it had started with a dime's worth of dumb luck on a cold-ass night in Detroit. What will Ellie do with all this money? Subscribe to the channel and let me know what you think. Don't miss the first twist. The morning sun barely broke through the gray haze hanging over Detroit, a weak sliver of light sneaking past the skyscrapers downtown and painting the streets in a dull, dishwater glow. Ellie Harper stood outside 500 Griswold Street, the suitcase thumping against her leg like a guilty heartbeat. Caldwell Industries loomed above her, a sleek glass tower with a stone base, the kind of place where suits made deals she'd never understand. Her boots, scuffed and salt-stained from last night's trek, looked out of place on the polished sidewalk, and her coat, $5 from Goodwill, felt thin against the wind slicing off the river. She smelled like fryer grease and stale coffee, the diner clinging to her even after she'd scrubbed her hands raw in the apartment sink. She'd barely slept, just a couple hours of tossing on the couch while Ruth snored soft and uneven beside her. That damn suitcase sat by the door all night, staring her down like it knew every broke-ass thought running through her head. Pay the rent, fix the sink, get Ruth's pills. But every time she'd reached for it, her mom's voice kicked in. "You don't take what ain't yours." And she'd yanked her hand back like it had burned her. Now here she was, half dead on her feet, hauling it to some rich guy named Ethan Caldwell, who probably wouldn't even blink at losing $100,000. The lobby hit her like a slap. Marble floors shining under a chandelier that looked like it cost more than her whole life. Air thick with the smell of wood polish and money. A security guard in a cheap blue uniform eyed her from behind a desk, his buzz cut glinting under the lights. "Help you?" he asked, voice flat, like he'd already decided she didn't belong. "Yeah," Ellie said, shifting the suitcase to her other hand. "Found this last night. Tag says Ethan Caldwell." "He around?" The guard's eyebrows twitched up, but he didn't budge. "Mr. Caldwell's a busy man. You got an appointment?" She snorted, too tired for bullshit. "No, man. I got his damn bag. Tell him Ellie Harper's here with $100,000 he dropped on the people mover. See if that gets me 5 minutes." He stared at her, then picked up a phone, muttering something low and quick. Ellie paced a tight circle, her boots squeaking on the marble, the weight of the suitcase dragging at her arm. People in suits brushed past, clicking heels, sharp cologne, voices buzzing about stocks or whatever the hell rich folks talked about. She felt like a stray dog that had wandered into a showroom, every eye scraping over her like she was dirt. After 10 minutes that felt like 10 years, the guard waved her over. "Elevator to 42. Someone'll meet you." She nodded, hefting the bag, and stepped into a glass box that shot her up so fast her stomach lurched. The city shrank below. Gray rooftops, the river snaking cold and dark, smokestacks puffing in the distance. She caught her reflection in the doors. Messy hair, dark circles, a face that had forgotten how to smile. "Great first impression, Ellie," she muttered, wiping a smudge of grease off her cheek. The doors slid open, and a woman in her 50s, sharp suit, graying bob, waited with a clipboard. "Ms. Harper," she said, voice crisp but not cold. "I'm Linda, Mr. Caldwell's assistant. This way." Ellie followed her down a hall lined with framed photos, oil rigs, construction sites, some guy in a hard hat shaking hands with Ethan Caldwell. The air smelled like old wood and toner, and the carpet muffled her steps, till she felt like she was sneaking. Linda pushed open a heavy oak door, and there he was, Ethan Caldwell, standing by a wall of windows overlooking the city, his back to her. He was tall, broad-shouldered, in a flannel shirt and jeans that didn't scream millionaire. His hair was salt and pepper, and when he turned, his face carried lines deep enough to tell stories. Tired eyes, a jaw set like he'd chewed through tougher days than this. "Ellie Harper," he said, voice low and rough, like he smoked too much or didn't sleep enough. He stepped forward, hands in his pockets, sizing her up without judgment. "Yeah," she said, dropping the suitcase at her feet with a soft thud. "Found this on the train platform last night. Figured you'd want it back." He glanced at the bag, then back at her, his gaze steady. "You didn't have to do that. Most folks wouldn't." Ellie shrugged, crossing her arms. "Yeah, well, I ain't most folks. Couldn't sleep with it sitting there, you know? Kept thinking about my ma. She'd kill me if I kept it." A flicker of something, amusement maybe, crossed his face, and he nodded. "Sounds like a good woman." He crouched down, unzipped the suitcase, and let out a slow breath as the stacks of cash came into view. Hundreds. neat and banded, just like she'd left him. All here? Far as I know, she said, shifting her weight. Didn't count it. Just saw it and figured it was yours. He pulled out the envelopes next, tied with that red string, and his hands paused, fingers brushing the paper like it was fragile. These two, he murmured, more to himself than her. He stood, tucking them into his jacket, and looked at her again, really looked, like he was seeing past the diner grease and the exhaustion. You're running Harper's joint, right? Over on Woodward? She blinked, caught off guard. Yeah. How'd you... Passed it a few times. Good coffee. Place looks like it's hanging on, though. He rubbed his jaw, the stubble rasping under his hand. What's it need? Ellie's mouth went dry. What? To keep going. Repairs, bills, whatever. You brought this back when you didn't have to. I owe you. She laughed, short and sharp, nerves bubbling up. Man, you don't owe me shit. I just didn't want to be the asshole who kept it. Ethan didn't smile, just kept that steady gaze locked on her. I'm serious. Say a number. Her head spun. $800 for rent, $60 for meds, maybe $1,000 to fix the sink and the busted fryer that had been smoking for weeks. But her tongue stuck, pride clawing at her throat. Look, I ain't here for a handout. I just... 20 grand, he cut in like he'd already decided. Enough to patch up the diner, get you some breathing room. Call it an investment. I'll take a cut of the profits later if it works out. Deal? Ellie's jaw dropped, the air sucking out of her lungs. 20 grand? You nuts? You don't even know me. I know you didn't keep $100,000 that could have solved all your problems, he said, voice flat but firm. That's enough for me. Take it or leave it. She stared at him, then at the suitcase, then back at him. The room smelled like leather and coffee now. His coffee, steaming in a mug on the desk, and the city hummed faint beyond the glass. Her hands balled into fists, nails digging into her palms. Fine, she said finally, voice tight. But I ain't your charity case. I'll pay you back. Every damn cent. He nodded, like that was all he needed to hear. Linda'll draw up the papers. You'll have the cash by tomorrow. He paused, then added softer. Those letters, they're from my wife, Grace. She's gone now, but they're for my kid, Sophie, and her brother Ryan. Been looking for 'em a while. This, it means more than the money. Ellie's chest tightened, a pang she didn't expect. Yeah, well, glad I didn't chuck 'em then. She tried for a grin, but it came out crooked, shaky. Ethan stepped closer, offering his hand. You're a good one, Ellie Harper. Detroit could use more like you. She took it, his grip warm and solid, and for a second, she felt something shift, like the ground under her wasn't slipping away for once. Don't get all mushy on me, she muttered, pulling back. I gotta get home. Ma's waitin'. Tomorrow then, he said, and she nodded, grabbing her empty hands like she'd forgotten how to hold 'em without that suitcase weighing her down. She rode the elevator back down, the city swelling up around her again. Gray, cold, unforgiving. 20 grand. A lifeline she hadn't asked for, from a man she didn't know, all 'cause she couldn't stomach stealing. Ruth's voice rang in her head again. Good girl, Ellie, and she smirked, stepping out into the wind, the weight of it all settling heavy on her shoulders. The smell of fresh paint and burnt coffee hit Ellie Harper like a wave as she pushed through the door of Harper's joint, the bell above jangling sharp against the hum of Detroit's early morning traffic on Woodward Avenue. It was a week since she'd hauled that suitcase back to Ethan Caldwell, and the diner was starting to look less like a sinking ship. New paint on the walls, a patched-up sink that didn't drip anymore, and a fryer that didn't belch smoke every time she flipped it on. The 20 grand from Ethan had landed in her account 2 days ago, wired straight from Caldwell Industries with a note from Linda. First step, make it work. She'd been up since dawn, sanding down the counter's chipped edges, her hands raw and speckled with white flecks, her dark hair tied back with a greasy bandana. The place wasn't packed, never was, but a handful of regulars nursed their mugs at the booths. Old man Jimmy, a retired auto worker with a voice like a busted muffler, and a couple of cabbies bitching about gas prices over plates of runny eggs. Rosa Delgado, her right-hand gal behind the counter, was flipping bacon on the griddle, the sizzle popping loud over the Motown crackling from the ancient radio. Rosa was 29, wiry and tough, with a faded tattoo of a rose peeking out from her sleeve, a holdover from rougher days she didn't talk about much. Her kid, Mateo, was at daycare, and she moved fast, like she was racing the clock to pick him up. "Ellie, you see this?" Rosa called, nodding at a stack of receipts by the register. Yesterday's take, a couple $100. Better than last month, but still tight. Her voice had that East Side edge, sharp and quick. "We're up a little. Paint's bringing 'em in." Ellie wiped her hands on her jeans, the denim stiff with dust, and grinned. Small, but real. "Yeah, well, wait till the fryer's humming full time. Might actually make a profit this year." She grabbed a rag, started wiping down the counter, the wood smooth under her fingers for once. The diner smelled alive now. Grease, coffee, a hint of paint thinner lingering in the corners. Sunlight slanted through the streaky windows, catching dust motes spinning lazy in the air. But the buzz in her chest didn't last. She'd heard whispers, nothing solid, just grumbles from a supplier who'd dropped off flour yesterday. "Heard Caldwell's throwing cash at some chick's diner," he'd muttered, smirking like it was a dirty joke. "Must be nice, huh?" Ellie'd brushed it off, but it stuck, gnawing at her like a splinter. 20 grand wasn't charity. It was a deal, a loan she'd pay back. But folks didn't see it that way. And now, standing in her half-fixed joint, she felt the itch of eyes on her back. The bell clanged again, and Ellie glanced up as a guy in a crisp gray suit stepped in, too clean for this part of town, his shoes polished to a shine that screamed money. Caleb Walsh. She'd seen his face in one of those framed photos at Ethan's office, smirking next to some oil rig, shaking hands like he owned the world. He was 45 maybe, with slicked-back hair going silver at the temples and a jaw that looked like it had been carved to intimidate. He carried a leather briefcase, the kind that cost more than her rent, and his cologne hit her before he even opened his mouth. Something sharp and expensive, cutting through the diner's greasy haze. "Ellie Harper," he said, voice smooth but cold, like ice sliding down a glass. He didn't sit, just stood there by the counter, eyeing the place like he was appraising a junkyard. "Yeah," she said, tossing the rag aside and crossing her arms. "Who's asking?" "Caleb Walsh, Caldwell Industries." He set the briefcase on the counter, right on her clean spot asshole, and popped it open, pulling out a tablet. "Heard you're the one Ethan's dumping cash into. Thought I'd see what the fuss is about." Ellie's gut tightened, but she kept her face steady. "Ain't no fuss." Found his bag, brought it back. "He's helping me keep this place afloat. End of story." Caleb smirked, tapping the tablet screen till it lit up with numbers she didn't catch. 20 grand's a hell of a thank you for a good deed. You sure that's all it is?" His eyes flicked over her. Jacket, jeans, the paint under her nails, like he was sizing up a scam. "You got a problem with it, take it up with Ethan," she shot back, her voice harder now, echoing over the sizzle of Rosa's bacon. "I ain't here to play 20 questions with you." He leaned in, just enough to make her feel the weight of him, his cologne stinging her nose. "No problem. Yet. Just curious how a diner chick lands a payout like that. People talk, you know. Board's already whispering. Ethan's got a soft spot, maybe too soft. Makes folks nervous." Ellie's hands balled into fists, nails digging into her palms. "Talk all you want, I'm not stealing shit, I'm working for it." Look around. This place ain't exactly a gold mine. Caleb's smirk didn't budge. Not yet, maybe. But money moves fast, and so do rumors. You keep cozying up with Ethan, might not just be your diner that takes a hit. He snapped the briefcase shut, the click loud in the quiet, and straightened up. Enjoy the paint job, Harper. Hope it's worth it. He turned and walked out, the bell jangling behind him, leaving a chill in the air that had nothing to do with the drafty windows. Ellie stood there, breathing hard, the rag twisted tight in her hand. Rosa slid over, a plate of bacon in one hand, her dark eyes narrowing. Who the hell was that? Trouble, Ellie muttered, tossing the rag into the sink with a wet slap. Some suit from Ethan's company, sniffing around like I'm running a con. Rosa snorted, setting the plate down. Let him sniff. We're legit. You're busting your ass here. Ain't our fault Ethan's got cash to throw. Yeah, Ellie said, but it didn't feel right. She grabbed a mug, poured herself coffee from the pot, black, bitter, scalding her tongue as she gulped it down. The diner hummed around her, Jimmy coughing into his napkin, the cabbies laughing over some dumb joke. But Caleb's words stuck like grease on her skin, whispers, rumors, Ethan's soft spot. She'd taken the money to save Harper's joint, to keep Ruth's meds coming, but now it felt like a target painted on her back. She stepped into the tiny kitchen, the air thick with heat and the tang of frying oil, and leaned against the wall, the cold tile grounding her. Rosa followed, wiping her hands on her apron. You okay, boss? Look like you seen a ghost. Nah, Ellie lied, forcing a grin. Just tired. Long night thinking about that damn suitcase. Rosa raised an eyebrow, her rose tattoo flexing as she crossed her arms. Still? Thought you were done with that mess. Thought so too, Ellie said, staring at the chipped floor. But it's like I kicked a hornet's nest. Ethan's in. Now this Caleb guy's out here acting like I'm some grifter. What if they think I kept something? Did you? Rosa asked, half teasing, but her eyes were serious. Ellie shook her head fast. Hell no. Gave it all back. Money, letters, every damn thing. But you heard that supplier yesterday. People are talking. And if Caleb's got the board's ear? She trailed off, the coffee turning sour in her gut. Rosa shrugged, flipping a spatula in her hand. Then let him talk. We got receipts, literally. Keep this place running, prove 'em wrong. Ain't like we're rolling in it yet. Ellie nodded, slow, but the unease didn't lift. She glanced out at the diner, fresh paint, patched sink, the flicker of hope she'd built with Ethan's cash. It was hers, damn it, hers and Ruth's, scratched out of nothing. But Caleb's smirk lingered, his words slithering through her head like exhaust fumes. Nervous bored, rumors, trouble. Back home that night, she'd check on Ruth, still sleeping off the morning's confusion, calling Ellie Tina, like she was some long-gone cousin. She'd sit by that couch, listening to the city hum outside, and wonder if she'd traded one mess for a bigger one. The suitcase was gone, but its shadow was sticking around. Will Caleb ruin everything? Subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts. Tension is rising. The air bit cold and crisp outside Harper's joint, the kind of Detroit morning where the wind off the river carried a sting and the sun barely bothered to show up, hiding behind a thick smear of gray clouds. Ellie Harper leaned against the diner's brick wall, her breath fogging in quick puffs as she sipped burnt coffee from a chipped mug. It was just past 8, the breakfast rush, if you could call 5 regulars a rush, dying down inside. Rosa was behind the counter, humming some old Selena tune over the clatter of dishes, while Ellie took a minute to shake off the jitters Caleb Walsh had left rattling in her chest yesterday. The fresh paint on the diner's front gleamed dull under the overcast sky, and the neon open sign buzzed like a tired fly, but it felt good. Hers, fixed up, fighting to stay alive. She was halfway through her coffee, when a beat-up Dodge pickup rolled into the lot, its muffler coughing loud enough to wake half the block. The truck was a rust bucket, faded blue paint peeling off in strips, one headlight dangling like a loose tooth, and it parked crooked, taking up 2 spaces. Ellie squinted as the driver's door creaked open and a guy stepped out, boots hitting the gravel with a heavy thud. He was tall, lean, with a grease-stained hoodie pulled low over his face, and hands shoved deep in his pockets. Something about him prickled her, like a stray dog you weren't sure would wag or bite. He didn't head straight for the door, just stood there by the truck, staring at the diner like he was sizing it up. Ellie straightened, setting her mug on the ledge, and called out, "We're open if you're hungry. Coffee's hot, food's decent." The guy flinched, like he hadn't clocked her till now, and pulled his hood back slow. His face was sharp, high cheekbones, a jaw shadowed with stubble, hazel eyes that looked like they'd seen too much and didn't trust the rest. Late 20s, maybe early 30s, with a scar cutting through one eyebrow that gave him a permanent scowl. "You Ellie Harper?" he said, voice rough like he smoked a pack a day, stepping closer till she could smell the oil and metal clinging to him. "Yeah," she said, crossing her arms, her gut tightening. "Who's asking?" "Ryan," he said, simple, like it explained everything. He jerked his chin at the diner. "Heard you're the one who found Ethan Caldwell's bag. That true?" Ellie's coffee went cold in her stomach, the mug forgotten on the ledge. "Depends who's listening. You a friend of his or just some dude sniffing around?" He snorted, a dry sound that didn't reach his eyes. "Not a friend. Guy's an asshole, always was. But yeah, I know him. Too damn well." He kicked a pebble across the lot, watching it skitter into a puddle, then looked back at her. "Word's out. Some buddy of mine down at the shop saw it online. That diner girl crap. Said you dragged a suitcase full of cash back to him. Why?" She bristled, the nickname scraping her raw. "'Cause it wasn't mine, genius. What's it to you?" Ryan's jaw tightened, and he stepped closer, boots crunching gravel till he was just a few feet off. The air around him smelled like gasoline and sweat, sharp against the diner's grease. That bag had letters in it, Grace's letters. "My sister. She's dead, been gone 5 years, and Ethan's sitting on her words like they're his damn trophy. You see 'em?" Ellie's breath hitched, pieces clicking too fast to dodge. Grace. Ethan's wife. Sophie's mom. And this guy, Ryan, her brother. She remembered the envelopes, that red string, the way Ethan's hands shook when he pulled them out. "Yeah, I saw 'em," she said, slow, keeping her voice steady. "Didn't read 'em, just handed 'em over with the cash. Ethan said they were for his kid, and some brother she had. That you?" Ryan's eyes darkened, a storm brewing behind him. "Yeah, that's me. Little brother who got left behind when she married that prick. He tell you he let her die? Worked himself into a coma while she was rotting away with cancer. Didn't even say goodbye till it was too late." His voice cracked, bitter as the wind, and he turned his head, spitting into the gravel like it had purged the memory. Ellie's chest tightened, but she didn't flinch. "He didn't tell me shit about that. Just said he's been looking for you. Sounded like he cared." "Cared?" Ryan laughed, short and harsh, the sound bouncing off the diner's brick. "He cared so much he forgot I existed. Ditched me after she was gone, left me scraping by in East Side garages while he played big shot downtown. I don't want his pity, or his money." "Then why are you here?" Ellie shot back, stepping off the wall, her boots planting firm. "You want to yell at me 'cause I found his shit? Take it up with him. I'm just the dumbass who didn't keep it." Ryan's scowl softened, just a hair, and he rubbed the back of his neck, grease smudging his skin. "Ain't here to yell, just needed to know if it was real. Those letters, Grace wrote 'em before she checked out. Said she'd send 'em to me and Sophie someday. Guess she never got the chance." Ellie softened too, despite herself, the fight leaking out of her. They're real. Saw her name on 'em. Pretty handwriting, like she took her time. Ethan's got 'em now. Maybe he's waiting to give 'em to you. He can shove 'em, Ryan muttered, but there was no heat in it. Just exhaustion, like he'd been carrying that hate too long. He glanced at the diner again, then back at her. You're fixing this place up with his cash, huh? Looks better than the dump it was last time I drove by. Yeah, she said, nodding at the fresh paint. Was gonna close without it. Still might if the suits like that Caleb guy keeps stirring shit. Ryan's brow furrowed. Caleb Walsh? Slick bastard with the fancy shoes? That's him, Ellie said, smirking despite the knot in her gut. Came by yesterday, acting like I'm some con artist. You know him? Know of him, Ryan said, spitting again, this time with purpose. Runs with Ethan's crowd. Boardroom shark, always looking for blood. Watch your back, he don't like loose ends. Ellie's smirk faded, Caleb's cologne-soaked threat flashing back. Might not just be your diner that takes a hit. She shook it off, but it stuck, heavy as the coffee mug still cooling on the ledge. Great, just what I need. Another rich asshole gunning for me. Ryan shrugged, stepping back toward his truck. You stepped in it when you took Ethan's deal. Ain't my mess, though. I'm out. Tell him I don't want his damn letters or his guilt trips. He yanked the door open, the hinges screaming, and climbed in, the engine roaring to life with a cough of black smoke. Wait, Ellie called, jogging a step forward before she could stop herself. You sure? Those letters, they're from your sister, man. Might be worth something. Ryan paused, one hand on the wheel, his eyes meeting hers, hard but cracked, like glass about to shatter. Worth something to who? She's gone, and I ain't digging up ghosts for Ethan's sake. He slammed the door, peeled out of the lot, and left her standing there, the growl of the truck fading into the city's hum. Ellie watched, till he was a speck down Woodward, then grabbed her mug, the coffee cold now, bitter on her tongue. Inside, Rosa glanced up from the griddle, bacon sizzling under her spatula. Who was that grease monkey? Grace's brother, Ellie said, setting the mug down with a clink. Ryan hates Ethan's guts. Ain't too happy I found that suitcase neither. Rosa whistled low, flipping the bacon. Family drama, huh? You're in deep, boss. Tell me about it, Ellie muttered, rubbing her temples. The diner smelled warm, grease, coffee, a hint of Rosa's cheap perfume, but Ryan's words clung like exhaust. He let her die. Ethan hadn't seemed like that guy. Steady, quiet, grateful. But now, she didn't know what to think. And with Caleb circling, whispering to the board, it felt like the ground was shifting again, ready to swallow her whole. The afternoon light slanted weak and gray through the streaky windows of Harper's joint, painting the diner in a dull wash that made the fresh paint look tired already. Ellie Harper stood behind the counter, her hands wrist-deep in a tub of soapy water, scrubbing grease off a stack of plates that had piled up from the lunch trickle. $8 in tips, a couple burnt burgers, and a spilled Coke she'd mopped up with a curse under her breath. The air smelled like fryer oil and bleach, thick and heavy, clinging to her thrift store flannel as she worked. Rosa was out back, sneaking a smoke by the dumpster, leaving Ellie alone with the hum of the radio, some old Stevie Wonder tune crackling through static, and the weight of too many damn problems. It had been 2 days since Ryan peeled out of the lot in his rust bucket Dodge, his words still bouncing around her skull like loose change. He let her die. She tried to shake it, focus on the diner, new menus on order, a guy coming tomorrow to fix the flickering open sign. But it stuck, gnawing at her alongside Caleb's slick threats and the 20 grand she still wasn't sure she deserved. Harper's joint was breathing again. Yeah, but it felt like borrowed air, and every creak of the floorboards reminded her how close she'd been to losing it all. The bell above the door jangled, sharp and sudden, snapping her out of her head. She looked up, expecting old man Jimmy or one of the cabbies, but it was Ethan Caldwell stepping in, boots scuffing the mat, his Carhartt jacket zipped against the cold sneaking through the cracks. His face was drawn, deeper lines than last time, like he hadn't slept since she'd dropped that suitcase at his feet. He carried a thermos under one arm, the kind you'd see on a job site, and his gray eyes flicked around the diner, empty now, save for the ghosts of grease and coffee lingering in the air. "Ellie," he said, voice low and rough, nodding as he slid onto a stool at the counter. "Got a minute?" She wiped her hands on a rag, the soap suds leaving wet streaks on her jeans, and leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "Yeah, sure. Long as you ain't here to take that 20 grand back." She tried for a grin, but it came out tight, her stomach twisting at the sight of him. He didn't smile, just unscrewed the thermos and poured coffee into the lid, the steam curling up sharp and bitter. "Nah, money's yours. Diner's looking good, paint's holding up." He slid the lid across to her, an offering, and she took it, the heat seeping into her cold fingers. "Thanks," she said, sipping it. Black, strong, better than the swill she'd been choking down all day. "What's up then? You don't strike me as the drop-by for a chat type." Ethan rubbed his jaw, stubble rasping under his hand, and stared at the counter like it'd give him answers. "Ryan," he said finally, the name dropping heavy between them. "He came by, didn't he?" Ellie's grip tightened on the coffee, her pulse kicking up. "Yeah. Yesterday. Rolled in here like a storm cloud, all pissed off and greasy. Said you let Grace die, his sister, your wife. That true?" Ethan flinched, just a twitch, but she caught it, pain flashing raw in his eyes before he shuttered it down. "Not the way he thinks," he said, voice low, scraping like gravel. "Grace got sick. Cancer. Fast. I was working oil deals out west, 18-hour days, trying to keep the company afloat. Thought I had time. Thought she did. By the time I got back, she was gone. Didn't even get to say goodbye." Ellie's chest ached, a pang she didn't want. "And Ryan?" "Blames me," Ethan said, staring into his thermos like it held the past. "He was a kid then, 20 maybe. Wild, angry, running with a rough crowd. Grace kept him out of trouble till she couldn't. After she died, he took off. Haven't seen him since, till now. Those letters she wrote, they're for him and Sophie. Been trying to find him to give him over." She set the coffee down, the mug clinking soft against the counter. "He don't want him. Told me to tell you to shove it. Said you're just playing guilty rich guy now." Ethan's jaw tightened, but he nodded, slow. "Figures. He's got every right to hate me. I screwed up, Ellie CIP. But I need him back. Sophie's asking about her mom, and he's the only one left who knew Grace like I did. You think you could—" "Whoa, hold up," Ellie cut in, raising a hand. "You want me to track him down? I ain't a damn detective. I run a diner, Ethan, barely keeping it together as it is." "I know," he said, leaning forward, his voice steady but urgent. "But he talked to you. Didn't run off screaming. That's more'n I've gotten in years. Just see if he'll listen. Please." Ellie stared at him, the coffee cooling between them, the radio crooning soft in the background. She wanted to say no. Hell, she should say no. She had Ruth to worry about. Caleb's whispers, a fryer that still smoked if you pushed it too hard. But Ethan's eyes, tired, pleading, cracked open in a way she hadn't seen before, hit her somewhere soft. "Fine," she muttered, dragging a hand through her hair. "I'll try. No promises. He's a prickly bastard." "Thanks," Ethan said, a ghost of relief crossing his face. He stood, screwing the thermos shut, but paused. Watch out for Caleb, too. He's been poking around the board. Don't like me spending on this place. Might get messy. Great, Ellie groaned, sarcasm dripping. Just what I need. More suits up my ass. He smirked, faint, and headed for the door, the bell jangling as he stepped out into the cold. Ellie watched him go, the diner settling back into its quiet hum, but her head was spinning. Ryan, Grace, Ethan's guilt, Caleb's threats. She grabbed a broom, started sweeping the floor just to move, the bristles scraping loud against the concrete. That night, back at the apartment off Cass, the air smelled like burnt toast and the cheap lavender spray Ruth loved. Ellie kicked off her boots, the floor creaking under her socks, and found her mom on the couch, wrapped in that patched quilt, staring at the TV, some game show flickering mute across her face. Ruth's eyes were glassy, unfocused, and when Ellie sat beside her, she didn't turn. "Ma?" Ellie said, soft, touching her shoulder. "You good?" Ruth blinked, slow, then looked at her. Really looked, like she was digging through fog. "Tina?" she mumbled, voice thin, her hand reaching out shaky. "You seen my keys? Gotta get to the diner." Ellie's throat closed up, hot and tight. Tina, Ruth's cousin, dead 10 years now. "It's me, Ma. Ellie," she said, forcing the words steady. "We're home. Diner's fine." Ruth frowned, her hand dropping, confusion clouding her eyes again. "Ellie, right. You're a good girl, huh?" She smiled, faint, then drifted back to the TV, her breathing shallow and uneven. Ellie sat there, the quilt scratchy under her fingers, Ruth's words cutting deeper than she'd let on. Good girl. Same thing she'd said 100 times, before the Alzheimer's, before the diner started sinking, before Ellie'd found that damn suitcase. Now it felt like a plea, a weight she couldn't shake. She glanced at the corner, her purse stuffed with yesterday's receipts, a scribbled note from Ethan. Ryan, East Side, maybe a garage. The city hummed outside, tires on wet pavement, a siren wailing far off, the thud of snow piling against the window. Ellie rubbed her face, exhaustion pulling at her bones, and muttered, "What am I doing, Ma?" Ruth didn't answer, just breathed, soft and fading. Caleb's whispers, Ryan's hate, Ethan's cash. It was all cracking the concrete she'd built her life on, and she didn't know how long it'd hold. The wind whipped through the open window of Ellie Harper's apartment, rattling the cheap blinds and carrying the bite of Detroit's late winter into the cramped living room. It was just past dawn, the sky a bruised purple over Cass Avenue, and the air smelled like snowmelt and the burnt toast Ruth had tried to make before Ellie woke up. She stood by the kitchen counter now, her hands wrapped around a chipped mug of instant coffee, weak, gritty, nothing like the stuff at Harper's joint. The TV buzzed low in the background, some morning news anchor droning about a factory strike, but Ellie wasn't listening. Her eyes were locked on a wooden box sitting on the counter, an old cigar box Ruth used to stash keepsakes, its lid scratched and faded from years of being shoved around. She'd found it an hour ago, digging through the closet for a spare blanket after Ruth complained the quilt wasn't warm enough. The box had tumbled off a shelf, spilling yellowed photos and a couple of Ruth's old diner name tags onto the floor. Ellie'd almost tossed it back, but something, maybe the coffee jitters, maybe the mess of Ethan and Ryan and Caleb swirling in her head, made her crack it open. Now she stood there, coffee cooling in her hands, staring at a letter she'd pulled from the bottom, a single sheet, folded tight, Ruth's shaky handwriting scrawled across it in blue ink. The paper smelled like dust and time, soft under her fingers as she unfolded it, her pulse kicking up like it knew what was coming. The words hit her slow, each one sinking in deeper than the last. Ellie, baby, If you're reading this, I'm gone, or close to it. I never told you about that night on 8 Mile, about Grace Caldwell. She was drunk, crashed her car into a pole, damn near killed herself and her kid brother Ryan. I was driving home from the diner, saw it happen. Pulled him out, got him to a doc friend of mine, no cops, no questions. She begged me to keep quiet, said her husband couldn't know, said Ryan was too young to take the fall. I did it 'cause it was right. Never told a soul, not even you. Be good, my girl. I'm proud of you. Always. Ellie's breath caught, sharp and ragged, like she'd been punched. The mug slipped from her hands, hitting the counter with a dull thud, coffee sloshing over the edge and dripping onto the chipped linoleum. "Ma," she whispered, her voice breaking as she pressed the letter to her chest, the paper crinkling against her flannel. Ruth, her Ruth, the woman who'd raised her on diner tips and Motown records, had saved Grace Caldwell? Ethan's wife? Ryan's sister? All those years ago, before the Alzheimer's stole her stories, and she'd never breathed a word. The apartment creaked around her, the radiator hissing, the blinds clattering, Ruth's soft snores drifting from the couch where she'd fallen back asleep after breakfast. Ellie stumbled to the table, dropping into a chair, the letter trembling in her hands. Her head spun. Grace, drunk behind the wheel, Ryan a kid in the wreck, Ruth hauling him out of twisted metal on some dark stretch of 8 Mile. She could see it almost, her mom's steady hands, the ones that flipped burgers and stitched quilts, pulling 2 strangers from a crash 'cause it was right. And now, 20 years later, that night had circled back, dropping a suitcase full of cash and ghosts right into Ellie's lap. "Ellie?" Ruth's voice rasped from the couch, thin and confused, pulling her out of the haze. Ellie turned, wiping her eyes quick with her sleeve, and saw her mom sitting up, the quilt tangled around her bony shoulders. Ruth's gray hair stuck out wild, and her eyes, cloudy now, lost more often than not, squinted at her like she wasn't sure who she was seeing. "Yeah, Ma, it's me," Ellie said, forcing her voice steady as she crossed the room. She knelt by the couch, smoothing the quilt, the fabric rough under her fingers. "You okay? Need something?" Ruth blinked, slow, her hand reaching out to pat Ellie's cheek, clumsy but warm. "You're crying, huh? What's wrong, Tina?" Ellie's throat tightened. Tina again, that damn ghost cousin. But she swallowed it down, managing a shaky grin. "Nothing, Ma. Just found something you wrote. About Grace Caldwell. Remember her?" Ruth's brow furrowed, deep lines carving into her face as she dug through the fog. "Grace?" she mumbled, her hand dropping to the quilt, fingers twisting the threads. "Pretty girl. Car all smashed up. I helped her, didn't I? Her and that boy. Wild one. Always in trouble." "Yeah," Ellie said, her voice cracking. "You did, Ma. Saved 'em both. Grace and Ryan. Why didn't you tell me?" Ruth's eyes drifted, unfocused, then snapped back to Ellie, sharp for a fleeting second. "Didn't need to," she said, soft but firm. "Wasn't for bragging. Just right." She smiled, faint, then faded again, her head tipping back against the cushion as the clarity slipped away. Ellie sat there, Ruth's hand limp in hers, the letter burning a hole in her pocket. Her chest ached, pride, grief, a mess of shit she couldn't name. All those years, Ruth carried that secret, through the diner closing, through Ellie's ex bailing, through the slow bleed of her memory, and now it tied her to Ethan, to Ryan, to that damn suitcase like a thread she'd never seen coming. She grabbed her phone off the counter, coffee still pooling sticky around the mug, and dialed Ethan, fingers fumbling, heart hammering. He picked up on the 3rd ring, his voice rough with morning gravel. "Ellie, everything okay?" "No," she said, too fast, then caught herself. I mean, yeah, but listen, I found something. A letter from Ma, Ruth. She knew Grace, Ethan. Saved her ass 20 years ago, her and Ryan, after a wreck on 8 Mile. Pulled him out of the car, kept it quiet. Silence stretched on the line, thick and heavy, till she heard him breathe, a sharp, shaky sound. Jesus, he muttered low. Grace never said. I didn't know. Neither did I, Ellie said, pacing now, the floor creaking under her socks. Ma wrote it down. Said Grace begged her to hide it, keep Ryan out of jail. She did it 'cause it was right. Ethan, this is why that suitcase landed with me, ain't it? Some kind of messed up full circle. Yeah, he said, slow, like he was piecing it together too. Maybe it is. Ellie, I need to see that letter. Can you bring it? Meet me at the diner, hour from now. Sure, she said, glancing at Ruth, still dozing, her snores soft against the TV's hum. But Ryan, he's got to know too. He's pissed at you, but it changes shit. I'll find him, Ethan said, firm now. Been asking around East Side. Got a lead on a garage he's working at. Just bring the letter, please. All right, Ellie said, hanging up, the phone cold against her ear. She tucked the letter back in the box, her hands shaking as she snapped it shut, the wood clicking like a gunshot in the quiet. The city woke up outside, car horns, a train whistle cutting through the dawn. But inside, it was just her and Ruth, the past spilling out of that dusty box like blood from a fresh cut. She grabbed her jacket, the leather creaking as she shrugged it on, and knelt by Ruth again, brushing her mom's hair back. You're something else, Ma, she whispered, her voice thick. Always were. Ruth didn't stir, just breathed, soft and fading, and Ellie stood, the box under her arm, the weight of it settling deep in her bones. An hour later, she'd be at Harper's joint, the letter in hand, waiting for Ethan and maybe Ryan, while Caleb's whispers grew louder and Ruth's mind slipped further away. The concrete was cracking wider now, and she didn't know if she could patch it fast enough. What does this letter change? Subscribe to the channel and guess what? The secret is revealed. The smell of grease and fresh coffee hung thick in Harper's joint, mixing with the sharp tang of new paint as Ellie Harper leaned against the counter, her hands wrapped around a mug she hadn't touched in 10 minutes. It was late afternoon, the Detroit sky outside a flat slab of gray pressing down on Woodward Avenue, and the diner buzzed with its usual stragglers. Old man Jimmy nursing his third refill, a couple of construction guys scarfing down fries in the corner booth. The radio crackled with some Marvin Gaye tune, smooth and low, but it couldn't drown out the thud of Ellie's pulse in her ears. The cigar box sat tucked under the counter, Ruth's letter inside like a live wire, burning a hole through her thoughts since she'd hauled it here an hour ago. Ethan was late, said he'd be here by 3, but the clock above the register ticked past 3:30 and no sign of him. She'd called twice, got voicemail both times, his rough, leave a message, cutting off with a beep that made her stomach twist. Rosa bustled behind her, flipping burgers on the griddle, the sizzle popping loud over the hum of the place. You good, boss? She called, glancing over her shoulder, her rose tattoo flexing as she wiped sweat off her brow with her sleeve. Look like you're waiting for the cops or something. Nah, Ellie lied, forcing a grin that didn't reach her eyes. Just Ethan, supposed to swing by, probably stuck in traffic downtown. Rosa snorted, flipping a patty with a flick of her spatula. Rich guy problems. Hope he brings more cash. Friar's acting up again. Ellie nodded, but her mind was elsewhere. Ruth's letter, Ryan's scowl, Ethan's plea to find him. She hadn't told Rosa yet, not about the wreck on 8 Mile or the way it tied her mom to this mess. Too much to unpack, and she didn't want to drag Rosa into it, not with Caleb Walsh already sniffing around like a shark smelling blood. The bell jangled, sharp and loud, and Ellie's head snapped up, expecting Ethan's broad frame. But it was Caleb Walsh striding in, his gray suit crisp as ever, briefcase swinging in one hand like a weapon. The air shifted, thicker, colder, his cologne cutting through the diner's grease like a blade. He didn't sit, just stopped a few feet from the counter, his polished shoes gleaming against the scratched linoleum, and fixed her with a smirk that made her skin crawl. "Harper," he said, voice smooth and icy, like he was tasting her name and didn't like it. "Busy day?" Ellie straightened, setting the mug down with a clink, her hands balling into fists at her sides. "Yeah, Caleb." "What's it to you? Come to slum it with us working folks?" His smirk widened, but his eyes stayed hard, blue and sharp, like glass under a streetlight. "Not quite. Heard you're getting cozy with Ethan. Real cozy. 20 grand's a start, but word's out he's planning more. Board's not thrilled." She bristled, stepping around the counter, her boots thudding firm. "That's his call, not yours. I ain't asking for shit, he offered. You got a problem, take it up with him." "Oh, I will," Caleb said, popping his briefcase open with a snap that echoed over Rosa's griddle. He pulled out a tablet, swiped it awake, and turned it toward her, grainy security footage flickering on the screen. Ellie's gut dropped as she saw herself, blurry but unmistakable, standing on that people mover platform, unzipping the suitcase, cash spilling into view. The timestamp glowed, 12:47 a.m., 2 weeks ago. "What the hell is this?" she snapped, her voice rising, drawing Jimmy's bleary eyes from his coffee. Rosa turned, spatula frozen mid-flip, watching tight-lipped. "Proof," Caleb said, tapping the screen to pause it, her hands on the money, frozen in guilt. "Found it on a city cam. You had that bag open, Harper. Plenty of time to pocket a stack or two before playing hero. Board's seeing this tomorrow. Gonna ask Ethan why he's bankrolling a thief." Ellie's blood roared in her ears, hot and fast, her fists clenching till her nails bit skin. "That's bullshit. I didn't take a dime. You doctored this, you slimy—" "Careful," he cut in, voice dropping low, venomous. "Call me names, doesn't change the tape. Looks bad, real bad. Ethan's already on thin ice with this little investment. One whiff of scandal, and Harper's joint is done. So's his stake in it." She lunged a step forward, close enough to smell his cologne, sharp, suffocating, but Rosa grabbed her arm, pulling her back. "Easy, boss," Rosa hissed, her grip tight. "He's baiting you." Caleb chuckled, dry and cold, sliding the tablet back into his briefcase. "Smart girl," he said, nodding at Rosa. "Listen to her, Harper. You're in over your head. Ethan, too. Pull out now. Maybe I don't push this. Keep playing, and I'll bury you both." "You want to play dirty?" Ellie growled, shaking Rosa off, her voice trembling with rage. "Go ahead." "I ain't scared of you. That tape's a lie, and I'll prove it." "Prove it to who?" Caleb said, stepping back, his smirk twisting wider. "Board don't care about your sob story. Diner chick with a sick mom. Boo-hoo. They care about optics. And this?" He tapped the briefcase. "This looks like theft. Good luck." He turned, the bell clanging as he strode out, leaving the diner quiet except for the hiss of the griddle and Marvin Gaye's fading croon. Ellie stood there, breathing hard, her hands shaking as she gripped the counter's edge, the wood biting into her palms. Rosa slid over, spatula still in hand, her dark eyes wide. "What the hell was that, Ellie? He's got video?" "It's fake," Ellie spat, slamming a fist on the counter, the mug rattling. "I didn't take shit. I gave it all back. He's setting me up, him and that damn board. Trying to tank Ethan, and I'm the easy target. Rosa whistled low, tossing the spatula into the sink with a clatter. That's some next-level crap. What's Ethan say? Dunno, Ellie muttered, grabbing her phone, thumbs jabbing at Ethan's number, straight to voicemail again. He's MIA, supposed to be here by now. Something's wrong, Rosa. Caleb's coming for blood. The construction guys glanced over, fries forgotten, but Ellie ignored them, pacing tight behind the counter. The diner smelled hot now, burnt grease, spilled coffee, her own sweat mixing with the paint fumes. She thought of Ruth, home with a neighbor watching her, probably lost in another fog, and the letter, tucked safe in that box. Caleb didn't know about that. Didn't know Ruth's secret tied her to Grace, to Ryan, to all of this. But if he pushed this lie, if the board bought it, Harper's joint was toast, 20 grand or not. Call him again, Rosa said, flipping the griddle off, the sizzle dying out. Or Ryan. Hell, anybody. You need backup, Ellie. Yeah, she said, dialing Ethan once more. Voicemail, that damn beep mocking her. She slammed the phone down, the crack echoing loud, and grabbed the cigar box, shoving it into her bag. I'm going to his office, 500 Griswold. If he's not there, I'll hunt Ryan down myself. This ain't ending with Caleb's smirk. Rosa nodded, fierce. Go get him, boss. I'll hold the fort. Fryer's on the fritz anyway. Ellie yanked her jacket on, the leather creaking, and stormed out, the bell jangling behind her. The city hit her hard, cold wind, honking horns, the rumble of a bus lumbering down Woodward. Caleb's tape burned in her mind, fake, sure, but real enough to ruin her. Ethan was in trouble, Ruth was slipping, and Ryan, God knows where he was. The concrete under her boots felt like it was splitting wide open, and she was running out of time to patch it. The air in Ellie Harper's apartment hung heavy with the stale tang of burnt toast and the faint lavender spritz Ruth sprayed whenever she remembered where the bottle was. It was late evening now, the Detroit skyline outside flickering through the cracked blinds, streetlights smearing yellow across the snow-dusted pavement of Cass Avenue. Ellie sat slumped on the couch, her boots kicked off by the door, her leather jacket still on like she might bolt any second. The cigar box sat open on the coffee table. Ruth's letter creased and soft beside it, the words staring up at her like a ghost she couldn't shake. She'd come straight home from Harper's joint after Caleb's ambush, her hunt for Ethan a bust. His office locked tight, Linda gone for the day, no answer at his phone or the garage lead he'd given her for Ryan. The diner was still standing, Rosa holding it together, but Caleb's fake tape looped in her head, her hands on that suitcase, the cash spilling out, a lie twisted into truth. Her chest felt tight, like the walls were closing in, and the coffee she'd chugged an hour ago sat sour in her gut. Ruth was in the bedroom now, down the hall, her snores rasping faint through the thin walls. Ellie had checked on her when she got in, found her mom wandering the kitchen, barefoot, muttering about a shift at the old diner that had closed a decade ago. Gotta get the hash browns going, Tina, she'd said, hands fumbling with a drawer till Ellie guided her back to bed, the quilt tucked tight around her frail shoulders. It was worse today, Ruth's eyes blanker, her words further from reality, and every Tina cut Ellie deeper, a shard of memory slipping away she couldn't grab back. The TV flickered mute in the corner, some infomercial hawking a blender, the host's grin too wide for the room's gloom, and Ellie rubbed her face, her hands rough with diner grease and paint flecks. She reached for the letter again, tracing Ruth's shaky loops with her thumb, the ink smudged where her tears had hit earlier. Grace Caldwell, Ryan. I did it 'cause it was right. Her mom had saved him, pulled him from a wreck on 8 Mile, kept it quiet, carried that weight alone, and now Ellie was drowning in the fallout. Caleb's smirk and Ethan's silence piling on top of Ruth's fading mind. A thud snapped her out of it, loud, sharp from the bedroom. Ellie bolted upright, heart slamming against her ribs, and ran down the hall, the floorboards creaking under her socks. "Ma?" she called, shoving the door open, the hinges squealing. Ruth was on the floor by the bed, tangled in the quilt, her nightgown twisted around her legs, her gray hair fanned wild across the carpet, and her hands clawed at the air, groping for something she couldn't find. "Ma!" Ellie dropped to her knees, sliding an arm under Ruth's shoulders, her skin cold and clammy through the thin cotton. "You okay? What happened?" Ruth's eyes darted, wild and unfocused, locking on Ellie like she was a stranger. "Where's my apron?" she rasped, voice high and panicked. "Shift's startin'. Gotta get to the diner, Tina. They're waitin'." "Shh, Ma, it's me, Ellie," she said, soft but firm, pulling Ruth up slow. "You're home, not the diner. You fell. Let's get you back to bed, huh?" Her hands shook as she lifted, Ruth's weight light but stubborn, her mom's bony frame trembling against her. "No, no, I gotta go." Ruth pushed at her, weak but frantic, nails scraping Ellie's arm. "They'll fire me. Jimmy's waiting for his coffee. Ma, stop," Ellie snapped, sharper than she meant, and Ruth froze, her eyes widening, cloudy with fear and confusion. Ellie's throat burned, guilt flooding hot behind her ribs. Sorry, just, you're okay. Jimmy's fine. Come on." She eased Ruth onto the bed, the mattress groaning, and tucked the quilt back around her, smoothing it with hands that wouldn't stop trembling. Ruth sank back, her breathing slowing, but her eyes stayed lost, drifting to the ceiling. "Ellie?" she mumbled, faint, like she'd just remembered. "My Ellie?" "Yeah, Ma," Ellie said, swallowing hard, brushing Ruth's hair back. "Right here." She grabbed the pill bottle off the nightstand, Ruth's Alzheimer's meds, half empty, and shook one out, pressing it into her mom's hand with a glass of water from the sink. "Take this, all right? It'll help." Ruth swallowed it, slow and mechanical, then gripped Ellie's wrist, her fingers cold but tight. "You're a good girl," she whispered, a flicker of clarity cutting through the fog. "Don't let him take it, the diner. You're good." Ellie's chest caved, tears stinging fast and hot. "I won't, Ma," she choked out, squeezing Ruth's hand. "Promise." Ruth's grip loosened, her eyes fluttering shut, and she drifted off, her snores picking up soft and uneven. Ellie sat there, till her knees ached, the carpet rough under her, the room smelling like lavender and dust, and the faint antiseptic of Ruth's meds. Good girl. Same words from the letter, from a Ruth who'd known who she was, who'd saved Grace and Ryan without a second thought. Now she was slipping, faster every day, and Ellie couldn't stop it, couldn't fix the diner, couldn't fight Caleb's lie with Ethan gone quiet and Ryan God knows where. She stumbled back to the living room, the letter still on the table, and grabbed her phone. Battery low, screen cracked from too many drops at the diner. Ethan's number, voicemail again. "Ethan, it's Ellie. Where the hell are you?" she hissed, voice raw. "Caleb's got fake video, says I stole from that bag. Ma's fallen apart and I need you here, man. Call me." She hung up, tossing the phone onto the couch, and sank down beside it, the springs creaking under her. The city hummed outside, tires on slush, a car alarm blaring blocks away, the wind rattling the blinds. Ellie stared at the cigar box, Ruth's secret spilling out like shards of broken glass she couldn't piece together. Harper's joint was hanging by a thread. Caleb's tape could snap it, take the 20 grand, take everything she'd fought for. Ruth was fading, her mind a sieve letting memories drip away, and Ellie couldn't patch it, couldn't hold her mom together any more than she could hold the diner. She grabbed her jacket, the leather cold against her skin, and stuffed the letter into her pocket, crinkled, smudged, her last grip on Ruth's strength. "I'm trying, Ma," she muttered, her voice cracking in the quiet. "Don't give up on me yet." She'd call a neighbor to sit with Ruth, then head out. Ethan's office again, Ryan's garage, anywhere. 'cause sitting here wasn't an option. Caleb was closing in, and the concrete under her feet was crumbling fast. Can Ellie save the bar and her mom? Subscribe and let me know. The emotions are running high. The hospital room felt like a tomb now. The silence pressing down heavier than the snow piling up outside Mercy General's streaky windows. Ellie Harper sat on the edge of the plastic chair, her leather jacket creaking as she leaned forward, elbows digging into her knees. Ruth's bed was empty, the thin blanket folded neat by a nurse who'd slipped out quiet as a ghost after the machines went dark. The air still stank of antiseptic, sharp and cold, mixed with the faint wilted sweetness of those damn flowers someone had left by the bedside. Ellie's hands clutched the cigar box, Ruth's letter tucked inside, its edges soft against her calloused fingers. Her eyes burned, red, raw, hollowed out from crying, but she wasn't breaking yet. Not with Caleb Walsh out there, swinging his fake video like a goddamn axe. Ethan Caldwell stood by the window, his broad frame cutting a shadow across the linoleum, his Carhartt jacket still dusted with snow that hadn't melted. Sophie curled up in the corner, her little knit cap pulled low, clutching that floppy-eared bunny like it was the only thing keeping her steady. Her soft sniffles bounced off the chipped beige walls, a quiet ache that twisted Ellie's gut worse than the flatline beep ever did. Ryan hovered near the door, his grease-stained hoodie pulled tight, hazel eyes darting between Ethan and the empty bed like he didn't know where to land. The tension hung thick, a wire stretched too tight, ready to snap. Ellie broke the quiet first, her voice rough as sandpaper. "We ain't got time to sit here feeling sorry. Caleb's got that tape, fake or not. He's taking it to the board tomorrow. Says I stole from your bag, Ethan. Says you're bankrolling the thief." Ethan turned, slow, his gray eyes narrowing. "Tomorrow?" His voice was gravel, low and tight, like he'd swallowed something sharp. Jesus. He's moving fast. "Yeah," Ellie said, standing, the box thumping against her thigh. "Fast enough to sink Harper's joint, and you with it. I ain't letting that slick bastard take what's mine. Not after." She glanced at the bed, her throat locking up, then forced it down. "Not after Ma." Ethan rubbed his jaw, stubble rasping under his hand, and stepped closer. "He's been gunning for me a while. Board's been antsy since Grace died, thinking I've lost my edge. It's his shot to push me out." He paused, eyes flicking to the box. "That letter. Ruth's letter. Let me see it." Ellie hesitated, her fingers tightening on the wood, then popped it open and handed him the creased paper. Ethan took it, his hands steady but his breath hitching as he read. Ruth's shaky scrawl spilling out that night on 8 Mile. The crash, the quiet favor that saved Grace and Ryan. His jaw clenched, a muscle ticking under the skin, and when he looked up, his eyes were wet but hard. "She never told me," he muttered, almost to himself. Grace kept it buried. Guess she was ashamed. And Ruth, hell, she carried it alone. "Yeah, well, Ma was like that," Ellie said, her voice cracking despite herself. "Did what's right. Didn't need a damn parade for it. But this—" She tapped the letter, her nail catching on a smudged loop. "This ties us together, Ethan. You, me, Ryan. Caleb don't know that yet, but he's about to find out we ain't rolling over." Ryan snorted, sharp and bitter from the doorway. "Ties us together? Cute story, Harper. But I ain't here for some family reunion bullshit. Ethan's still the asshole who let Grace rot while he chased oil money." His boots scuffed the floor, restless, like he was 2 seconds from bolting. Ellie spun on him, her patience fraying. "Then why are you still standing there, huh? You could have peeled out of here the second Ma flatlined, but you didn't. You want to know why? 'Cause that letter's got your name on it too, Ryan. Ruth saved your ass, Kept you out of jail when you were too drunk to know better. Maybe you owe her something." He flinched hard, his hazel eyes flashing with a storm she couldn't read. Anger, shame, maybe both. "I didn't ask her to," he shot back, voice low and jagged. "Didn't ask Grace to cover for me neither. I was a dumb kid. Should have been me in that wreck, not her taking the fall." "Enough," Ethan cut in, stepping between them, his voice firm but tired. "Blame me all you want, Ryan. I deserve it. I wasn't there when Grace needed me, and I lost you 'cause of it. But Ruth, she gave us a second shot. Gave me Sophie. Gave you years you wouldn't have had. We owe her this fight." Ryan's fists balled in his pockets, his jaw working like he was chewing glass. But he didn't argue. Sophie uncurled from her corner, her bunny dangling, and tugged Ethan's sleeve. "Daddy, is Uncle Ryan gonna help?" Her voice was small, shaky, cutting through the room like a knife through fog. Ethan knelt, brushing her curls back. "I hope so, kiddo." He glanced up at Ryan, not pleading, just waiting. Steady, like he'd take whatever came. Ellie crossed her arms, the box still in her grip. "Look, I don't give a shit if you hate Ethan's guts. Caleb's coming for me too. Harper's joint, Ma's place. That tape's a lie, but it's good enough to screw us all. You know him, Ryan, better'n me. You got any dirt? Any way to hit back?" Ryan's eyes flicked to her, then Sophie, then the letter in Ethan's hand. Something shifted, slow, grudging, like ice cracking under weight. "Maybe," he said finally, voice rough but quieter. "Got a buddy, Tommy, down on East Side. Used to work city maintenance. Had access to traffic cams before he got canned. If that tape's doctored, he might dig up the raw feed. Prove you didn't snatch nothing." Ellie's pulse kicked up, a flicker of hope cutting through the grief. "You serious? That could bury Caleb. Show the board he's the one full of shit." "Yeah," Ryan said, dragging a hand through his hair, grease smudging his knuckles. "But it ain't free. Tommy's a paranoid bastard, don't trust nobody. And it's a long shot. Those feeds get wiped fast. We'd have to move tonight." "Tonight works," Ellie said, fast, slinging the box under her arm. "I ain't sitting here while Caleb swings. You in or out?" Ryan stared at her, then at Ethan, his scowl softening just a hair. "Not for him," he muttered, jerking his chin at Ethan. "For Grace. And, hell, maybe Ruth. She didn't deserve this end." Ethan nodded, slow, a ghost of relief crossing his face. "Fair enough. I'll stay with Sophie. Gotta prep for that board meeting tomorrow. You two get that feed. I'll make sure they see it." "Deal," Ellie said, zipping her jacket, the leather cold against her skin. She glanced at Sophie, forcing a small grin. "Hang tight, kiddo. We'll sort this mess out." Sophie nodded, shy, burying her face in her bunny. Ryan grabbed his keys from his pocket, the jangle loud in the quiet. "Let's roll, Harper. East Side ain't pretty this late. Hope you're good with a wrench if Tommy gets twitchy." Ellie smirked, brittle but real. "I've handled worse than some grease monkey. Lead the way." They stepped out into the hall, the fluorescent buzz fading behind them as the cold hit hard, Detroit's night air biting through her coat, carrying the tang of exhaust and wet snow. Ryan's rust bucket Dodge waited in the lot, coughing black smoke as he fired it up. Ellie climbed in, the passenger seat sagging under her, the cab smelling like oil and stale cigarettes. She pulled Ruth's letter from the box, tracing the words with her thumb as Ryan peeled out, tires crunching gravel. The city blurred past, flickering streetlights, boarded-up storefronts, the distant wail of a siren cutting through the hum. Ellie's mind raced. Caleb's smirk, that fake tape, Ruth's last words looping like a broken record. "Don't let him take it. You're good." She glanced at Ryan, his jaw set hard, hands tight on the wheel. "You sure this Tommy guy's legit?" she asked, voice low over the engine's growl. "He's a nutcase, but he's good," Ryan said, eyes on the road. "Caught him hacking feeds once to dodge a DUI, owes me for keeping my mouth shut. If anyone's got that footage, it's him." "Good enough," Ellie said, tucking the letter back. The Dodge rattled over a pothole, jarring her bones, and she stared out at the dark stretch of East Side ahead, warehouses looming like ghosts, neon flickering from a dive bar. Her chest tightened, a mix of grief and fire she couldn't shake. Caleb wanted to play dirty? Fine. She'd show him dirty, her and Ryan, two busted-up strays with nothing left to lose but a diner and a promise. The truck's headlights cut through the snow, and Ellie's hand clenched on the box. "We get this," she muttered, half to herself. "Caleb's done. For Ma." Ryan didn't answer, just floored it, the engine roaring into the night. Ellie and Ryan have what it takes to flip this fight. Subscribe to the channel and guess shit's hitting the fan now. The morning hit Detroit like a slap. Gray, damp, and mean. The kind of cold that sank into your bones and stayed there. Ellie Harper stood outside 500 Griswold Street, the glass tower of Caldwell Industries looming over her, like a judge ready to drop the gavel. Her boots crunched on salt-strewn pavement, still scuffed from last night's trek through East Side, and her leather jacket hung heavy with the damp of snow that had melted into it. The cigar box was tucked under her arm, Ruth's letter inside, its weight a quiet anchor against the storm churning in her gut. Beside her, Ryan slouched against his rust-bucket Dodge, hood up, grease-stained hands shoved deep in his pockets. His breath puffed out in white clouds, hazel eyes sharp but tired, like he'd wrestled the night and barely won. They'd made it back from East Side just past 3 a.m., the Tommy's paranoid ass finally coughing up the goods, a grainy USB stick with the raw traffic cam feed from that night on the People Mover platform. It had cost Ellie a busted wrench to the side of Tommy's rusted-out trailer door. Guy pulled a knife, twitchy as hell, till Ryan talked him down with a fifth of Jack and a promise to keep his name out of this. The footage was gold. Ellie unzipping the suitcase, sure, but not a damn bill leaving it, just her shoving it all back in, hands shaking, before hauling it off. Proof Caleb's tape was bullshit, chopped and twisted to frame her. Now it was 8:45, the board meeting set for 9, and Ethan still wasn't picking up his damn phone. "You sure he's in there?" Ellie asked, voice rough from no sleep, nodding at the tower. Her free hand flexed, itching to hit something, preferably Caleb's smug face. Ryan spat into the snow, a dark streak against the white. "He better be. Left him a voicemail at 4. Told him we got the feed, said meet us here. If he's smart, he's prepping his ass off." Ellie snorted, bitter. "Yeah, well, smart don't mean shit if Caleb's already got the board eating out of his hand. That prick's been whispering for weeks. Got him thinking I'm a thief and Ethan's a soft-touch loser." She shifted the box, the wood creaking under her grip. "We're cutting it close." "Tell me something I don't know," Ryan muttered, kicking the Dodge's tire. The muffler coughed, a low growl echoing off the concrete. "Let's move. Clock's ticking." They crossed the street, the wind slicing off the river and stinging Ellie's cheeks as they pushed through the revolving doors. The lobby hit her like it did the first time, marble floors gleaming under a chandelier that screamed money, air thick with wood polish and the faint buzz of suits on phones. The same buzz-cut security guard eyed them from the desk, his cheap blue uniform wrinkling as he leaned forward. "Back again, huh?" he said, voice flat. "Caldwell's up on 42. Board's already in session. You got business?" "Yeah," Ellie said, hefting the USB stick from her pocket, its plastic cold against her fingers. "Business that'll save his ass. And mine. Tell him Ellie Harper and Ryan, She glanced at him, realizing she didn't know his last name. "Mitchell," Ryan cut in, sharp. Tell him we got proof Walsh is full of shit. The guard raised an eyebrow but picked up the phone, muttering low. Ellie paced a tight circle, boots squeaking on the marble, her stomach twisting like a wrung-out rag. Ryan stood still, eyes locked on the elevators, jaw tight like he was chewing nails. After a minute that felt like 10, the guard waved him over. They're expecting you. 42. Don't keep 'em waiting. The elevator ride was a gut punch. Glass walls shooting up fast, the city shrinking below into a gray smear of rooftops and smokestacks. Ellie caught her reflection. Messy hair, dark circles, a face carved raw by grief and grit. Ryan looked worse, stubble thick, scar on his brow stark under the lights. You good? She asked, low, as the numbers ticked past 30. Good as I get, he said, voice gravelly. Ain't here to play nice, just want to see that bastard squirm. Same, Ellie said, smirking despite herself. The doors slid open at 42, and Linda, Ethan's assistant, sharp suit and graying bob, waited with a clipboard, her face tight but not cold. Ellie, Ryan, she said, nodding quick. He's in there. Board's got the tape up. Caleb's pushing hard. You sure about this? Damn sure, Ellie said, holding up the USB. This'll shut him up. Linda led him down the hall, past framed photos of oil rigs and hard hats, the air smelling like toner and old wood. She pushed open a heavy oak door, and the room hit Ellie like a wall. Long table, a dozen suits in stiff chairs, faces carved from stone. Ethan stood at the head, flannel shirt out of place among the ties, his gray eyes locked on a screen where Caleb's fake footage looped, her hands on the cash, frozen mid-frame. Caleb Walsh leaned back in his chair, gray suit crisp, silver hair slicked like a shark's fin. His smirk was a blade, cutting through the room as he tapped a pen on the table. Like I said, gentlemen, proof. Harper's a thief, and Ethan's throwing cash at her like a fool. We can't trust his judgment, not with the company on the line. Ethan's jaw clenched, but before he could speak, Ellie stormed in, boots thudding loud. That's bullshit, and you know it, Walsh. She slammed the USB on the table, the clack echoing over the hum of the projector. Your tape's a damn lie. Here's the real feed. I didn't take a dime. The room went still, suits shifting, eyes flicking between her and Caleb. He didn't flinch, just raised an eyebrow, voice smooth as ice. Cute, Harper. You think some last-minute stunt's gonna save you? That footage is city-stamped, irrefutable. Funny thing about city cams, Ryan said, stepping up, his voice rough but steady. They don't lie, unless some slick bastard like you cuts them up. Check the raw feed, shows her putting it all back, every bill. He crossed his arms, grease smudging his hoodie, daring Caleb to push. Ethan grabbed the USB, plugging it into a laptop on the table. The screen flickered, then cleared, grainy black and white, timestamp glowing, 12:47 a.m. Ellie's blurry figure unzipped the suitcase, cash spilling out. But there it was, her hands shoving it back, no stacks disappearing, just her hauling it off, shoulders slumped. Murmurs rippled through the suits, heads tilting, eyes narrowing at Caleb. That's not possible, Caleb snapped, standing, his pen clattering to the table. She's bluffing. Doctored it herself. You can't trust... Shut it, Ethan cut in, voice low and hard. You've been gunning for me since Grace died. Think I don't know? But this... He tapped the screen. This buries you. Ellie brought that bag back. 100 grand, letters and all. You're the one screwing with the truth. Caleb's smirk faltered, just a twitch, but Ellie caught it, sweet as hell. Then the door creaked, and Sophie slipped in, bunny dangling from her mittens, her knit cap crooked. She froze, eyes wide at the room, then ran to Ethan, tugging his sleeve. Daddy, I found this. In your coat. She held up an envelope, faded red string dangling. Grace's handwriting, to Sophie and Ryan. Ethan's breath hitched and he knelt, taking it. "Kiddo, where'd you—" "Read it," Sophie said, voice small but firm. "Mommy wrote it, for us." She glanced at Ryan, shy, then back at Ethan. "Please?" The suits went quiet, air thick as Ethan tore it open, his hands shaking. He cleared his throat, reading slow. "Sophie, my sweet girl, be brave, okay? Daddy loves you, even when he's lost. Ryan, God, I'm sorry I couldn't fix us. Ruth saved me that night. Saved you. Forgive him, please. I love you both." His voice broke, and Sophie hugged him. Bunny squished between them. Ryan's shoulders slumped, eyes wet, staring at the floor like it'd swallow him. Ellie stepped closer, voice soft. "She wanted you here, man. Ruth did too. This proves it." She slid Ruth's letter across the table, the suits leaning in as Ethan read it aloud. Grace's crash, Ruth's quiet rescue, a dime's worth of kindness tying them all together. Caleb laughed, dry and desperate. "Sob stories don't change facts. Ethan's still unfit." "Enough," a suit barked. An older guy, bald, with a voice like steel. "We've seen the feed, heard the letters. Walsh, you're done. Falsifying evidence? You're out." The room nodded, murmurs rising, and Caleb's face went pale, his smirk gone like smoke. Ellie exhaled, the weight lifting. Harper's joint safe, Ruth's legacy intact. Ryan met her eyes, a nod, cracked but real. Ethan hugged Sophie tighter, tears streaking his stubble, and Ellie clutched the cigar box, feeling Ma's pride in her bones. Caleb's down. But is it over? Subscribe and tell me. Tears and triumph just hit hard. The snow fell slow and heavy outside Mercy General, fat flakes sticking to the streaky windows of the hospital room like they were trying to bury the past under a fresh coat of white. Ellie Harper sat on the edge of the plastic chair, her leather jacket slung over the back, still damp from the morning's trek to Caldwell Industries. The cigar box rested on her lap, its scratched wood warm under her fingers. Ruth's letter tucked inside, creased, smudged, the last piece of her mom she could hold on to. The room was quiet now, too quiet, the flatline beep still echoing in her skull even hours after it had stopped. Ruth was gone, really gone, and the weight of it sat on Ellie's chest like a slab of concrete she couldn't shift. Ethan Caldwell stood by the bed, his broad frame hunched, Carhartt jacket unzipped, his gray eyes fixed on the empty mattress where Ruth had taken her last breath. Sophie clung to his leg, her knit cap crooked, Bunny dangling from her mittens as she sniffled into his jeans. Ryan leaned against the wall near the door, hood up, grease-stained hands shoved deep in his pockets, his jaw tight like he was biting back something he didn't want to say. The air smelled sharp, antiseptic and wilted flowers, a bitter mix that stung Ellie's nose and made her eyes burn all over again. They'd just come from the boardroom, the victory over Caleb Walsh still ringing in their ears. His fake tape shredded by the raw feed, his smirk wiped clean when the board turned on him. He was out, suspended pending an investigation, his briefcase left behind like a kicked dog as he stormed out of 500 Griswold. Harper's joint was safe, Ethan's stake in it secure, but it didn't feel like a win. Not yet. Not with Ruth's absence sucking the air out of the room. Ellie broke the silence, her voice low and cracked. She knew, you know. Right at the end. Knew who I was. Called me Ellie. She traced the box's lid with her thumb, the wood rough under her skin. Said she was proud. Then she was gone, just like that. Ethan turned, slow, his stubble catching the dim light. She held on for you, he said, voice rough as gravel. Long as she could. Gave us this. He tapped his jacket pocket, where Grace's letters sat tied with that faded red string. Gave us a shot to fix what's broken. Yeah, Ellie said, swallowing hard, her throat tight as a fist. But it don't bring her back. Don't fix the fact I couldn't. She trailed off, tears hot and fast, and wiped them quick with her sleeve, the flannel scratching her cheek. Couldn't keep her here. Sophie unhooked from Ethan's leg, stepping closer, her bunny dragging on the linoleum. Miss Ruth was nice, she whispered, voice small but steady. She smiled at me. Before, you know. She glanced at the bed, then up at Ellie, eyes wide and wet. You're not mad at her, are you? Ellie's chest caved, a sob catching in her ribs. No, kiddo, she said, forcing a shaky grin. Not mad, just miss her, Saul. She'd have liked you, probably slipped you a cookie under the table. Sophie nodded, shy, then hugged her bunny tighter. Ryan shifted, boots scuffing the floor, and cleared his throat, the sound harsh in the quiet. She didn't deserve this, he muttered, eyes on the ceiling like it'd keep him dry. Alzheimer's? Bullshit way to go. Grace got cancer, Ruth got that. What's the damn point? There ain't one, Ellie said, sharp, meeting his gaze. Just happens, sucks the life out of you till there's nothing left. But she fought it, fought hard. For me, for that night, she saved your ass and Grace's. Ryan flinched, just a twitch, but didn't argue. He stepped closer, hesitant, like the room was a minefield. I didn't know, he said, voice low, cracking. All those years, hating Ethan, thinking Grace ditched me. Didn't know some diner lady kept me out of jail. Should have thanked her. You can thank her now, Ethan said, straightening, his hand on Sophie's shoulder. Help Ellie keep that place going. Harper's joint, Ruth's spot. That's what she'd want. Ellie's head snapped up, the box creaking in her grip. You serious? After all that board crap? You're still in? Yeah, Ethan said, steady, a ghost of a nod. Caleb's out. Board's backing me again, thanks to you two. 20 grand's just the start. I want to see it grow. Make it something Ruth'd be proud of. You game? She stared at him, then Ryan, then Sophie, 3 cracked pieces of a puzzle she hadn't meant to fit. Hell yeah, she said finally, voice thick. But I ain't doing it alone. Ryan, you in or what? He rubbed his neck, grease smudging his skin, and smirked. Faint, real. Maybe. Ain't got much else going. Garage pays shit, and I'm tired of running. For Grace, and Ruth, I guess. Good, Ellie said, standing, the chair scraping loud. She opened the box, pulling out Ruth's letter, and held it up, the paper trembling in her hand. This is why we're here, all of us. Ma pulled Grace and Ryan out of that wreck, kept it quiet 'cause it was right. Now it's on us to keep her going, not just the diner, but this. She waved at him. Ethan, Sophie, Ryan, a family she'd stumbled into on a cold-ass night with a suitcase full of ghosts. Ethan stepped forward, his boots heavy on the linoleum, and put a hand on her shoulder, warm and solid. We will, he said, voice rough but sure. Caleb's done. Board's cutting him loose. You saved it, Ellie. Saved us. She nodded, tears spilling now, hot against her cold skin. Wasn't just me. Ma started it. You finished it. Ryan moved closer, hesitant, then stuck out his hand, grease and all. I'm sorry, man, he said, voice breaking as he looked at Ethan. For everything. Grace'd want this. Us here, not fighting. Ethan took it, gripped tight, eyes wet. Yeah, she would. Took Ruth to show us that. Sophie wedged between them, bunny flopping, and grabbed Ellie's hand, small and cold. "We're a team now, right?" she asked, looking up, curls bouncing. Ellie laughed, shaky, squeezing back. "Yeah, kiddo, guess we are." The room settled, snow tapping the window, the city humming faint outside, tires on slush, a siren wailing blocks away. Ellie tucked the letter back in the box, snapping it shut, the sound sharp in the quiet. Ruth was gone. Her snores, her Motown tunes, her foggy Tina calls. But she'd left this. A diner. A chance. Two families stitched together by a dime's worth of kindness from 20 years back. Ethan slung an arm around Sophie, pulling her close. "Let's get out of here," he said, voice thick. "Hospital coffee's shit. Harper's joint's better." "Damn right," Ellie said, smirking through the tears, grabbing her jacket. Ryan nodded, following, his boots scuffing slow like he was testing the ground. They stepped into the hall, the fluorescent buzz fading behind them, the cold hitting hard as they pushed outside, Detroit's winter air sharp with exhaust and snowmelt. Ellie paused by the Dodge, the box under her arm, watching Ethan lift Sophie into his truck across the lot. Ryan stopped beside her, hands in his pockets, breath fogging. "You really think we can pull this off?" he asked, low, eyes on the snow. "Yeah," she said, steady, Ruth's voice in her head. "Proud of you, always." "We got Ma's playbook. Ain't no stopping us now." He smirked, faint, and climbed into the driver's seat, the engine coughing to life. Ellie slid in, the cab smelling like oil and stale smokes, and they rolled out, the hospital shrinking in the rear view, a tomb left behind for something new, something hers, built on the ashes of what Ruth gave 'em. Ruth's gone, but her fight ain't. Can they keep it alive? Subscribe and tell me. This one's a tear-jerker. The summer sun hung low over Detroit, a lazy orange smear bleeding into the skyline as it dipped below the smokestacks along Woodward Avenue. Ellie Harper stood in the gravel lot of Harper's joint, her boots kicking up dust, a cold bottle of Werner's sweating in her hand. 6 months had passed since Ruth's ashes hit the wind off Belle Isle, and the diner wasn't just hers anymore. It was a chain now, small but real, with a second spot opening a mile down on Grand River. The original joint buzzed behind her, its blue paint weathered but proud, the neon open sign flickering steady against the dusk. The air smelled like fryer grease and fresh-cut grass, a warm hum cutting through the city's usual bite. Inside, the place thrummed with life. Plates clattering, Rosa barking orders over the sizzle of the griddle, kids laughing over milkshakes in the corner booth. The chalkboard menu glowed with new additions. Ruth's hash brown melt still topped the list, but now there was Sophie's crayon sundae, vanilla soft serve with sprinkles, and Ryan's grease monkey burger, a messy stack of beef and bacon that sold out most nights. The 20 grand from Ethan had patched the cracks, but the last 6 months? That was blood, sweat, and a crew Ellie hadn't seen coming. The rumble of a truck broke her reverie, Ethan's black F-150 rolling in, cleaner than it had been in winter, pulling a small U-Haul trailer stacked with boxes. He climbed out, flannel swapped for a faded Pistons tee, his gray stubble trimmed shorter now, like he'd finally caught a breath. Sophie hopped down behind him, her bunny swapped for a beat-up sketchbook, her backpack jangling with markers as she waved at Ellie, curls wild in the humid air. "Hey, boss," Ethan called, shutting the door with a thud, a grin cracking his face. "Heard you're running us ragged. Second spot's already booked for Friday nights?" Ellie smirked, taking a swig of Vernor's, the ginger bite sharp on her tongue. "Yeah, well, blame your kid. She's got half the block hooked on those Sundays. Rosa's threatening to quit if I don't hire more hands." Sophie giggled, skipping over, her sneakers crunching gravel. "Miss Rosa said I'm her best customer. She gave me extra sprinkles yesterday." She hugged Ellie quick, sketchbook squished between them, then darted inside, the bell jangling loud. Ethan watched her go, eyes soft, then nodded at the trailer. Last of my stuff. Sold the condo downtown this morning. Moving into that place off Cass. 5 minutes from here. Close enough to keep you in line. Ellie raised an eyebrow, leaning against the diner's brick wall, the rough edge catching her shirt. You? Out of the suits and ties for good? Thought you'd missed the boardroom bullshit. Nah, he said, rubbing his jaw, stubble rasping under his hand. Stepped down last week. Official. Let him fight over the CEO chair. I'm done. Got Sophie to raise, and this... He waved at the diner, the lot, the hum of life spilling out the door. This is where I'm at now. Ruth'd approve. Damn right she would, Ellie said, voice thick, lifting her bottle in a half-toast. Might be laughing her ass off seeing you slinging burgers instead of oil deals. He chuckled, low and real, grabbing a Werner's from the cooler she dragged out front. The cap hissed as he popped it, the fizz cutting through the grease in the air. Speaking of, where's Ryan? Thought he'd be here breaking in the new grill. Out back, Ellie said, jerking her thumb toward the alley. Training the newbies. Couple guys fresh out of lockup, needed a gig. Figured he's the man to show 'em the ropes. Knows how to keep 'em straight. Ethan's grin faded, just a touch, replaced by something softer. Good call. He's been solid. Showing up, pulling his weight. Didn't think he'd stick around after, everything. Yeah, Ellie said, slow, staring at the bottle's label peeling in her hand. Took Ruth and Grace to drag him back, me too, I guess. Ain't perfect, but he's here. The bell jangled again, and Ryan stepped out, wiping his hands on a rag, his flannel sleeves rolled up, grease smudged across his knuckles. 2 guys trailed him, late 20s, rough around the edges, one with a shaved head and a nervous tic, the other with a faded neck tat and a limp. Yo, Ellie! Ryan called, voice rough but lighter than it had been in months. These jokers are slow as hell, but they'll get it. Grill's hot, burgers are flippin'. Better be, she shot back, smirking. Ain't paying 'em to stand around looking pretty. The shaved head guy, Dre, she remembered, grinned, shy. Ain't nobody said we're pretty, ma'am. Just trying not to burn the damn place down. Good start, Ellie said, nodding. Keep it up. Ryan's a hard ass, but he's got your back. Ryan snorted, tossing the rag over his shoulder, and grabbed a Werner's, popping it open with a flick of his thumb. Hard ass, huh? Least I ain't the one crying over hash browns every night. Shut it, Ellie laughed, shoving his arm, the bottle cold against her palm. That's Ma's recipe. You'd cry too if you had taste. He smirked, faint, then glanced at Ethan, the air between them still a little jagged but smoother now. You really ditched the big chair? He asked, sipping slow, eyes narrow. Yeah, Ethan said, steady, leaning against the truck. Sold the suits with the condo. Figure I'll stick to frying instead of firing. You okay with that? Ryan shrugged, a small, cracked thing. Long as you don't burn my burgers, we're cool. Took long enough to get here. Grace'd be pissed if we screwed it up now. Damn right, Ethan said, a nod passing between them. Quiet, real, a truce carved out of years of rust. Sophie burst back out, sketchbook flapping, and tugged Ryan's sleeve, marker streaks on her hands. Uncle Ryan, look, I drew the new place. She held it up. A wobbly diner with blue walls, stick figure Ellie flipping burgers, Ryan at the grill, Ethan pouring coffee, and a big sun labeled Ruth overhead. It's us. Ryan's face softened, a crack splitting his scowl, and he ruffled her curls, grease smudging her cap. Not bad, kid. You're hired. Better than these clowns back there. Dre and the tat guy, Joey, laughed, low and easy, heading back inside as Rosa yelled something about fries burning. Ellie watched him go, then turned to the trio. Ethan cracking open another Werner's, Ryan sketching a burger on Sophie's page, Sophie giggling like the world made sense. The diner glowed behind him, warm lights spilling onto the lot, the hum of Motown drifting out. My Girl, Ruth's anthem, like she'd cued it from the clouds. "This what you pictured?" Ethan asked, low, catching her eye over Sophie's head. "When you found that damn suitcase?" Ellie took a long swig, the ginger sharp and sweet, and shook her head, a grin tugging her lips. "Hell no. Thought I'd pay the rent, maybe fix the sink. Not this. Not you clowns." "Worth it, though?" he pressed, voice rough but warm, like he needed to hear it. She looked at him, Ethan steady as stone, Sophie's crayons streaking wild, Ryan's cracked smirk, and then at the diner, Ruth's blue walls standing tall. "Yeah," she said, soft, the ache in her chest easing just a hair. "Worth every damn dime." Ryan glanced up, fry halfway to his mouth. "What's a dime get you these days?" he asked, half teasing, half real. Ellie laughed, loud and free, the sound bouncing off the brick. "Us, man. Brought us home, somehow." Ethan raised his bottle, Sophie her sketchbook, Ryan a greasy fry, 3 clinks in the dusk, a toast to the mess they'd made and the life they'd built. The city hummed around them, tires on asphalt, a train whistle cutting the distance, the faint buzz of neon. But Harper's joint stood firm, a lifeline Ruth had tossed him, caught and held tight. "New starts here. Can they keep it rolling? Subscribe and tell me. Damn, this feels good." The September breeze rolled soft through Detroit, a warm whisper tugging at the edges of summer as it brushed down Woodward Avenue. Ellie Harper stood in front of Harper's joint, her boots planted firm on the cracked sidewalk, a hammer in one hand and a small brass nail in the other. The diner glowed behind her, its blue paint weathered but bright under the late afternoon sun, the neon open sign buzzing steady like a heartbeat. The air smelled like fresh-baked biscuits, Rosa's latest tweak to Ruth's recipe, and the faint tang of gasoline from the traffic humming past, a city alive and kicking as the days turned shorter. She held a dime between her fingers, its edges worn smooth, a faint 1969 stamped into the silver. Ruth's lucky coin, the one she'd kept in her apron pocket back when the diner was just a greasy dream on a shoestring budget. Ellie'd found it last week, tucked in the cigar box under a stack of old receipts, glinting like it had been waiting for her. Now, with the second Harper's joint thriving on Grand River and a third spot in the works near East Side, it felt right to give it a home, right here, where it all started. The bell jangled behind her, and Ethan stepped out, a tray of iced coffees sweating in his hands, his Pistons tee streaked with flour from helping Rosa roll dough. Sophie trailed him, sketchbook under her arm, her bunny retired to a shelf inside for a beat-up pencil case stuffed with markers. Ryan followed, flannel sleeves rolled up, grease smudged on his knuckles from tweaking the new grill out back. Same old hustle, but his smirk was softer now, less jagged around the edges. "What you doing, boss?" Ethan asked, setting the tray on the ledge by the door, his gray eyes squinting at the dime. "Giving us a history lesson?" Ellie smirked, tapping the nail against the brick wall, just above the window where Ruth used to lean out and yell at late delivery guys. "Something like that," she said, voice rough but warm. "Ma's dime. Figured it's time to hang it up. Been a hell of a ride since I found that damn suitcase, huh?" "Understatement," Ryan muttered, grabbing a coffee, the ice clinking as he took a swig. "Thought you were nuts dragging that thing back. 100 grand and you didn't even blink." "Yeah, well," Ellie said, lining up the nail. "Ma raised me stupid like that. Don't take what ain't yours even when you're drowning." Turns out, she was right. She swung the hammer, a quick thwack driving the nail in, and hooked the dime's edge over it, the coin catching the sun with a dull gleam. She stepped back, hands on her hips, the metal winking like Ruth was up there grinning down. Sophie tilted her head, marker streaks on her cheek from doodling inside. It's pretty, she said, soft, hugging her sketchbook. Miss Ruth's watching us, right? Liking my picture? Damn right, kiddo, Ellie said, ruffling her curls, a pang hitting her chest. Warm, not sharp anymore. She's got the best seat now, laughing at us trying to keep this circus rolling. Ethan chuckled, leaning against the wall, coffee dripping condensation onto his boots. She'd have loved it. 3 joints, us bickering like family, Sophie drawing all over the damn place. Hell, even Ryan sticking around. Miracle right there. Shut it, Ryan shot back, smirking over his cup. Ain't my fault your burgers suck. Somebody's got to save the grill from you. Keep talking, Ethan said, grinning. I'll stick you on dish duty with Dre and Joey. They'll burn the place down just to spite you. Ellie laughed, loud and free, the sound bouncing off the brick and mixing with the hum of the city. Tires on asphalt. A train whistle cutting the distance. Kids yelling from a stoop down the block. She grabbed a coffee, the ice cold against her palm, and leaned on the ledge beside Ethan, watching the diner pulse with life. Rosa waved from the counter, her rose tattoo flexing as she flipped a biscuit onto a plate, while Dre and Joey hustled trays to a packed booth. Ex-cons turned line cooks, steady now, thanks to Ryan's no-bullshit pep talks. Never thought I'd see this, Ellie said, half to herself, voice low over the ice clinking in her cup. Thought I'd lose it. Ma, the joint, everything. That night on the platform, freezing my ass off with that suitcase, felt like the end, not a start. Ethan nodded, slow, his eyes on the dime glinting above him. Same. Grace was gone. Ryan was gone. Thought I'd just keep running till the company ate me alive. Then you show up, dragging that bag, and Ruth's ghost kicks us all in the ass. Ghost my ass, Ryan said, smirking, but his voice softened. She was real. Pulled me and Grace out of that wreck. Didn't blink. Took you finding that letter to make me see it. Damn near too late. Never too late, Ellie said, steady, meeting his eyes. Ma didn't save you for nothing. Grace neither. Took a dime and a lot of dumb luck, but we're here. That's what counts. Sophie tugged her sleeve, sketchbook flapping. Look, Ellie, I drew us again. She flipped it open. A wobbly Harper's joint, blue walls bright, Ellie at the counter, Ethan pouring coffee, Ryan at the grill, and a big dime shining overhead with Ruth scribbled in red. It's our house, right? Ellie's throat tightened, coffee forgotten in her hand. Yeah, kiddo, she said, voice thick, pulling Sophie into a quick hug. Our house. Damn good one, too. The bell jangled as Rosa poked her head out, wiping flour on her apron. Yo, boss, biscuits are selling out, and Dre's asking for a raise already. You gonna stand there all day or help? Comin', Ellie called, laughing, downing her coffee in one gulp, the cold hitting her teeth. She handed the empty cup to Ethan, smirking. You're on refill duty. Don't slack, old man. Old man, my ass, he shot back, grinning, grabbing the tray as Sophie darted inside, sketchbook flapping. Ryan followed, tossing his rag over his shoulder, already barking at Joey about the grill temp through the open door. Ellie lingered, alone now, the diner's hum wrapping around her like a quilt. Ruth's quilt, patched and tough. She looked up at the dime, its silver catching the last of the sun, and let her fingers brush the brick, rough and warm under her skin. Started with you, Ma, she said soft, like Ruth could hear her over the Motown spilling out. I heard it through the grapevine, her old favorite. Didn't think a dime'd do this, drag us out of the dark, build us a home, but it did. She turned, stepping inside, the bell jangling sharp as the diner hit her full force. Grease, coffee, Rosa's laugh, Sophie's crayons streaking the chalkboard, Ethan pouring refills, Ryan flipping burgers with Dre and Joey hustling behind him. Harper's joint wasn't just a place anymore. It was theirs, a lifeline Ruth had tossed 'em all, caught on a cold night, and held tight through every damn storm. "Long taught don't make you rich," Ellie said, half to the room, half to the air, her voice warm over the clatter. "But it gives you a roof, sometimes a whole damn family. That's Ma's trick. Always was." She grabbed a tray, diving into the chaos. Biscuits to plate, coffee to pour, a grin cracking her face as Sophie waved a red marker at her. The city hummed outside. Tires on wet pavement, a siren fading, the faint rustle of leaves kicking up in the breeze. But in here, it was steady, real, a legacy carved out of loss and luck and a dime's worth of grit. Did Ruth's dime change it all? Subscribe and tell me what hit you hardest. Thanks for riding this one out with us.